Now, the Buckeye Extra podcast with Rob Aller, Bill Rabinowitz, and Joey Kaufman from the Columbus Dispatch.
Hello, everybody, and welcome to another edition of the Buckeye Extra Football Podcast. It's a big week, and we have a big guest here from Oregon, John Canzano, longtime columnist for the Oregonian in Portland. And now, John, tell people what you're doing now. You have a radio show.
Yeah,
to be honest,
I'm on a pirate ship right now. So you're joining me on this pirate ship. No, I left the paper. You know, we've all seen what's happening in media, and so I left and went on my own a few years ago. And I host a radio show that's a daily radio show, an afternoon drive that's syndicated across the state. But if people want to read me, they can read me at johncanzano.com. That's where to find me. I appreciate you having me on. I'm a big fan of yours, Bill. Of course, you do a hell of a job.
Well, thank you. And it's Canzano.
Correct. Canzano. Yep.
Well, people have been talking about this game for a long time. So ever since the schedule came out, right?
Yeah.
What's the mood? What's it like in Eugene right now?
Well, I can tell you this. They have credentialed 220 media members for this game. That is a big number for the Autzen Stadium press box. And you know, there's some talk. I wrote a column today about this could be the largest ticketed sporting event in the history of the state. There was an IndyCar race in 1993. There's a little bit of controversy around whether or not the all-in number should count. That was 63,000 at that. I think they're going to be above 60,000. They're going to at least break the Autzen Stadium record, which is 60,000 and some change. And you know, the standing room only tickets went like hotcakes. I've got everybody asking me for tickets. I have no tickets. Don't at me. And so I just think there's a lot of buzz around it. And people have been waiting. As you know, this game was supposed to happen during the pandemic. And so People have been waiting for it. And it's really validating, I think, to the Oregon program to have Ohio State come out. But I just a lot of buzz and a lot of anticipation. I don't think there's, in my time, I think it's been 20, 22 years since I've been here. I haven't experienced a football game that's got this kind of run up in the home region. And so Michigan came a few years ago or several years ago, but nothing like this. This is center stage.
Because Autzen seats only 54,000, right? Something in that range.
Yeah, but they will often have 58, 59. I don't know. They're talking about potential expansion, but I think, you know, I've been told it's more likely that they're going to put in more club seats and premium seating. They don't feel a real need to go above and beyond. And you know, the season tickets sold out, you know, before the season. They had 11,000 new season ticket applications. You know, and I very quickly was like, how many of these have Ohio's zip codes? You know, like, are these Ohio State fans who are just going to buy the one game and dump the rest of the package? But I was told that it was only a handful of Ohio zip codes in that initial run. But you know, I do think, you know, I shared kind of my column this morning with officials at Oregon, and I said, are you going to break the stadium record? Are you going to break the state record? Or, you know, are you going to put this IndyCar thing to rest? And it's definitely on their mind. They were aware of it. They were aware of the numbers. So I don't know if they can get to 63, but I think they can get above 60.
Okay. I wrote a story years and years ago. I think when Ohio State played Oregon on the Rose Bowl in 2009, I think it was. And talking about the program and Eugene, just for people who've never been to Oregon, and I've never been to Oregon, I'm looking forward to coming.
Yeah.
What is special about Eugene, about Oregon football?
Well, look, I covered the Big Ten in the late 90s. And one of the things that struck me, being a West Coast guy who was out in the Midwest all of a sudden, was that you had true college towns. You had, you know, these great college towns in the Big Ten Conference you know, Eugene's a college town. Corvallis is a college town. We've got a couple in this region. Pullman, Washington, college town. They remind me of, you know, in some ways of those towns where everybody kind of shuts down on game day and the game is the thing going on. And, you know, generations of fans have been in that parking lot. And, you know, but I think the thing that is interesting about Oregon is obviously the connection with innovation and Nike that sort of blends with this woodsy Pacific Northwest. There's a river running by the campus, and when you're in the press box, Bill, you're going to look out and you're going to go, I don't know that I've seen a more beautiful setting than just sort of the leaves and the trees in the distance beyond the stadium. And, it just becomes a real rallying point. And I don't think the Midwestern Big Ten fans are all that different in their love for their program. But, this Autzen Stadium thing, it's interesting to me because I talked to some other former Pac-12, SIDs and assistant coaches, and they sort of pointed to the idea that they don't know that, Autzen's not, like going to a game at Ohio State, right? From sheer numbers, or it's not like going to Ann Arbor.
Right.
Yeah, size-wise, no. But the intensity of the sound, I'm going to be really interested to see what you think when you get inside the stadium. It's just the acoustics of the building, the fans being right on top of you, the way they built the stadium. I had coaches at Stanford tell me they thought it was the loudest place in the country, and they've been to other stadiums around the country. And I'd be really curious to see what you think of the 55 or 60,000 people that are there and how loud that sounds as far as the saturation of sound inside the stadium. It does become a really difficult place for opposing teams to play. I was trying to think of the last time that Oregon was an underdog at home in a game. I can't remember it. You have to go back a long ways, but this is as big as the games come. And I think it'll be interesting to see this setting, this team, this new conference, Dan Lanning and his coaching staff against Ryan Day and Chip Kelly. I mean, I think there's a lot of tentacles to this game.
Yeah. Well, let's talk about Chip Kelly. Obviously, he was there from 2009 to 12, I think, that were the years. Took them to the BCS championship. Unprecedented success. The first time Oregon had ever been ranked number one was under Chip Kelly. Then he leaves for the Eagles. I mean, tell me how people view Chip Kelly in Eugene.
Yeah, I think that people are very fond of him. And, I think if they announced him before the game, he'd get a standing ovation. A couple things at play. Like normally when coaches leave, fan base is mad at a coach. Very different in Eugene. I think people really appreciated what Chip Kelly did. I called him an accelerant, right? Like you had Rich Brooks, you had Mike Bellotti, you had a great foundation that was built, but you had largely these coaches that had been around the program for 25, 30 years. All of a sudden, Mike Bellotti, the head coach, he tried to hire Gary Croton. He did. He brought him in, didn't really like, the play calling. He hired Andy Ludwig, who's now at Utah, brought him in for a few seasons, 3 seasons, and then he found Chip Kelly at New Hampshire. And so Kelly comes in and he's like this accelerant that you throw onto the program. Mark Helfrich said it, calls it like this chemical reaction that happened between the innovation of Nike, the ideas that Chip Kelly had, everything Chip Kelly touched in that time that he was at Oregon seemed to blossom other than his very first game. He loses to Boise State in the very first game. And then it's like Camelot after that. I mean, they just won and won and won and won at a level that was unprecedented in Eugene. And so when he leaves, he didn't leave for another school. He left for the NFL. And so I think Duck fans really viewed that as validation for their program, that, they weren't just a stepping stone to another college. This is not Kalen DeBoer leaving Washington for Alabama. This was Chip Kelly doing everything he could possibly do. And in fact, he had been offered the Tampa Bay Buccaneers job the year before, and he turned it down. And so I think the fans in Eugene and the boosters in Eugene largely viewed this as this was, a great thing. He did great things for the school. Now it's time for him to go off and fly in the real world. And everything that happened after, like everybody's got uniforms. Everybody played fast. Everybody kind of went to the stuff that Chip was doing. There was never really a regression in the Chip Kelly era. There was no settling. It was just up and up and up. It was like watching NVIDIA stock just go crazy, or, there was no there's no plateau to his era. And even after he left Marcus Mariota behind. Mark Helfrich takes Mariota, obviously, 2015, sure. It's Ohio State and Oregon playing for a national title. But everything that Chip Kelly has done, people are very fond of him. His wife still has family in the Eugene area. Right. And, I think people were really sad when he left, but they understood.
Yeah, I did a story on that. There wasn't a whole lot. I asked Chip about it yesterday in the press conference, and he said, yes, I've got family there. Yes, I think very fondly. I'm looking forward to going back. You probably didn't read the story I wrote. I wrote a story in the summer on the relationship between Chip Kelly and Ryan Day and how it formed and all that. And Chip Kelly, I'm sorry, Ryan Day could have been the Mark Helfrich. Ryan
Yeah.
Day was all set to take the job as the offensive coordinator, and they were at a birthday party, and he basically already accepted. And Ryan Day is with his family, and they're all from the East Coast, they're all from New Hampshire, and I think he was in BC at the time. And he realized I can't do this. They had RJ, who was I think a year old, and they're like, we can't move across the country. We have no family, no support system. And he called Chip Kelly and said, I know I told you I'd take it, but I can't take it. And Chip was really understanding and said something to the effect of, that's the reason I love you, because you're making the decision for this reason. So Ryan Day could have very easily been
Yeah.
across the sideline coaching Oregon in that championship game against Urban Meyer. Um, so yeah, I figured that there was no animosity toward Chip Kelly there, but I didn't know. So
Yeah. And I think there were a lot of people who hoped maybe that he'd stay forever. But, I hosted my radio show. Chip was the kind of guy when he first became a head coach who would just call into my show unsolicited. I would not have him booked as a guest. And this was still when he was finding his sea legs as a head coach.
yeah,
He still wasn't, and I think he enjoyed kind of the East Coast talk radio banter. And he would be making this drive, especially in his first season. He drove from Eugene to Portland, which is about an hour and 40 minutes, with no traffic. And while he's making that drive, he'd call into the show and we'd have a conversation. It was his off day from no media. And, he just was looking for a conversation about anything but football. And we would talk about why he's not on social media. We would talk about his favorite movies. We would talk about his mother, who buys him a football still to this day, Bill. She buys him a football every Christmas, even though he has unlimited access to
yeah,
footballs. And
yeah.
last Christmas, I got a text from Chip on Christmas morning, and it was just a photo of a Nerf football, and it said "Mom for the win." And he is a real person outside of football that I think had interests, and he as he sort of evolved as a head coach, he got a little more distant, right? And I
Yeah,
think
yeah.
head coaches will do that, and certainly the NFL. I think by the time he got through the NFL experience, the media was not his friend. But really, I think people in Oregon were happy to see him go be happy. And I think he's probably found some happiness calling plays and scheming at Ohio State.
Yeah, that's exactly what he wants to do. It's funny you say that because I remember interviewing him when he was the Oregon coach. I was supposed to do a profile of him that year at the Rose Bowl, and he gave me nothing. I mean, he wasn't rude,
Yeah.
but he was just like there was nothing. He was not going to go there.
Yeah.
And so
Yeah.
I
He was
think you
done
got
with
him
it
early.
by the time he left I think he was done with it, as he was going off to the NFL. But early on, he pulled me aside after their first victory. They beat Purdue in their first victory. It was a home win. I think it came in overtime. And I had covered Purdue as a beat reporter years earlier, and I was kind of shaking my head at it going, I don't know if Purdue's a bowl team. And Chip pulled me aside at the next news conference. He says, "You really think they're not a bowl team?" And it was just shocking to me that, he had read the column and he wanted to, like a reader, that you'd bump into at the grocery store, wanted to have a conversation about it.
Well, it's clear just in my conversations with him, he's a really smart guy, a
Yeah.
really smart guy, and I'm not surprised that his worldview is bigger than the football field. Not everyone's is, and
Right.
it's good that he has such a demanding job. They're in the bunker forever. They spend their
Yeah.
lives there. So anyway, let's kind of move on to the game. What's the level of confidence you think? And I don't want you to speak for Oregon fans, but
Yeah.
just to get a feel for the place. What's the level of confidence among Oregon fans for this game?
Well, I think the biggest question is Dylan Gabriel, and it's surprising that here we are in
Right,
week 5
right.
or 5 games in, I should say, and that's the question because I think the prevailing thought when Gabriel went into the portal and came to Oregon was, okay, they have the next Bo Nix. The questions will be, on the defensive line or the offensive line where they're replacing a bunch of guys but you're really watching a really, I think, talented, smart quarterback struggle a little bit with being acclimated through 5 games with an offensive coordinator in Will Stein, who maybe Will Stein was a little spoiled in that he had Bo Nix for multiple years. Nix was a much better quarterback in his second season than he was in his first. I think, to be fair to Gabriel, it's been a matter of months, right, that he has
Yeah.
been in this system, and it's his third college. Keep in mind, some of this may be portal related, but the last two games in particular, he has looked uncomfortable in the red zone. And before that, he looked uncomfortable in general. And so I'm really wondering if they can shore that up in, 7 days they had, because it was a Friday night game. Dan Lanning, after the Michigan State game, said in the post game, made an interesting comment where he said, we kind of took the decision making away. Basically, we stopped trying to make decisions and we just ran the ball against Michigan State because they were just better on the line of scrimmage.
Right.
They dominated on the offensive line of scrimmage. They dominated defensively on the line of scrimmage. And I thought it was really an admission there that, that Gabriel was having some problems. And you could see from Lanning's reaction, he threw 2 interceptions in the red zone against Michigan State. He threw a pick 6 in the red zone a week earlier against UCLA. That's 21 points you're giving away. You can do that against Michigan State and UCLA and win comfortably. You cannot do that against Ohio State. So I'm really curious to see, that offensive comfort that Gabriel needs to have, particularly in the red zone. Pay attention to it. All 3 interceptions, he was kind of rolling out, rolled right on 2 of them, rolled left on 1 of them. So it's not a right-left thing. It's just I think he's trying to throw into a window that's not there. And some of it may be struggling with what the read is, or some of it may even be, I feel like they have told him to this point, they don't want him out there running around and being crazy legs Gabriel. He's been real limited where he uses his legs. And I wonder if this is the game where they tell him, all right, it's okay to run here, because to this point, I don't think he's hurt teams running the football.
Yeah. Again, we're joined by John Canzano, the man in Oregon, the man.
Thank you. I appreciate that. My kids would disagree. My kids would be like, come on. What are you doing?
Mine too. 3 years ago, Oregon came to Ohio State. We know what happened. They exposed Ohio State's defense. Now, this is a very different defense for Ohio State. That defense, and I'm hoping to write about that this week, is that was the beginning of the end, and then really the beginning of the process that got Ohio State Jim Knowles. Could they do it again? Is this offense good enough to expose Ohio State, even though Ohio State's defense is much sounder than it was 3 years ago?
This offense is got a great running back in Jordan James. It's got one great running back. A lot of people talk about the depth of that room, but I think he is head and shoulders the best back in that room. And they've run the ball better in the last couple of weeks. I was really looking at the first half stats against Michigan State, comparing Ohio State's first half 6 days earlier against Oregon's first half. And, it really was a negligible difference. They both abused Michigan State and disrupted Michigan State. And so, I think this game to me feels like it's a really close game. I'm not sure, Bill, if we're being honest, you and I just talking here, I'm not sure if either of these teams is great. Like, I'm not sure either of these teams is going to win it all. I don't know that yet because they haven't played anybody. I need to see this. And so here they are against each other. This is their first chance, I think, to kind of go, okay, how good are we? And so the cool thing is it's not an elimination game for either one of these programs. But I think, Ohio State's coaching staff has got a lot more experience. I like Chip Kelly against Tosh Lapoy. I think that is the biggest matchup I'm looking at, Ohio State's offense against Oregon's defense. And then we're going to see maybe again at the end of the season and, in the conference championship game, this could be a rematch. And did they get better? Just to give you a little comparison, last year, Oregon played Washington about this point of the year, and I thought Oregon was the better team. They looked like the better team, even though they lost the game. By the end of the year, Washington was better, and it was noticeable. So I'm curious to see not just what happens Saturday, but all right, if this is, the quarter pole of the Kentucky Derby, which one of these teams looks good, at a mile, right? And so we need to kind of see that and then watch the rest of the way. But I don't think this is going to be a runaway win for either team. Feels really tight. Dan Lanning has coached tight to this point of the season. Be curious to see if the vein comes out in his neck like it did against Colorado last year. But there's just going to be a lot of emotion around this game, and I hope both teams handle it well.
Yeah, neither team's been challenged really, but I think the difference is that Oregon really struggled with Idaho, which was a shocker, and Boise State. And Ohio State really hasn't struggled with anybody. I mean, 7-0 against Oregon last week or against Iowa last week.
Yeah.
But it should have been bigger. They'd Ohio State a couple turnovers. Michigan State could have been a lot closer if Michigan State hadn't turned the ball over. But still, we're talking about lopsided wins in all 5 games. Whereas Oregon, I mean, Idaho took them down to the wire, really. So
Yeah.
that was an
Boise
eye-opener for
too.
me. Boise too,
Yeah.
right?
And look, I think by the end of the year, I have a suspicion that we're going to be talking about Boise as a playoff team. I just have watching them, the physicality up front on both sides of the ball. It's there. They've got a Heisman back in Ashton Genty, but he ran for a $192 on Oregon. I mean, it wasn't like he had a bad day against Oregon. He got 7.7 yards a carry. But Boise might finish in front of the Big 12 champion in the rankings. Like we might be thinking about them. It's not unthinkable they could be the 4 team, but we don't know. And so, Idaho is not bad either. I mean, they got a win over Wyoming after the Oregon game. They look good, but still, that's FCS football. Come on.
Right.
So, I think we're going to learn a lot this week, win or lose, about both these teams. And I think kind of the objective, obviously, is to win the game by both teams. But if this is a marathon, and if this 12-team playoff really is going to do what we all say and create kind of a frenzy at the end of the year, you're jockeying for position here. You're jockeying for a first-round bye in the playoff. That's kind of the feel and the stakes for me Saturday, is like, which one of these teams has the inside track on the bye?
And I think the winner of this game, I don't want to say is a lock to make the playoffs, but in Ohio State's case, they really have 2 other tough games, and I'm not even sure. Well, you don't ever overlook Michigan, especially what's happened the last 3 years. But you look what Michigan looks like this year, and what Ohio State looks like, and Ohio State's clearly a better team. But you have Penn State on the road, tough game. Michigan, who knows? Maybe Indiana. I mean, Indiana's they haven't played anybody really, but they're impressive. But you figure that Penn State and Michigan are really the game. So a 2-loss Ohio State team is in the playoff, right? They're not going to get a bye, but they're going to get in the playoff. So this one really punches your ticket if you're Ohio State. You have to think. And probably
on that note,
similarly.
Yeah, Oregon similarly, but Oregon's going to some new places, Bill. Like,
they got to make the travel. It's tougher for them.
And we have seen this travel thing. I think we all thought, the travel's not going to be a problem for football. It's a charter. What are we whining about? All this stuff. And now we're watching these teams go across multiple time zones and struggle. And even Miami trying to go to Berkeley the other night, you could really tell that there was an impact to that game being in Berkeley and kicking off late. This one kicking off at 4:30, I don't think is as much of a problem for Ohio State. But I do look at Oregon. Oregon's got, they got to go to Purdue on a Friday night. Purdue's not very good, but still, it's a weird place to go. You're going to Madison, Wisconsin. They're going to Ann Arbor. There's just some new trips in here that are a little unknown and wonky for a program that is used to going to Arizona and Stanford and Cal, and you know what to expect going into those places. So I think some of this conference realignment stuff has created a little bit of uncertainty on that front. But I agree with you. I think winner of this game, you're penciling them in as at least an at-large team.
Yeah, I think that's a good description. Let's talk about Oregon's defense. Pretty much, from what I understand, strong in all 3 areas: defensive line, linebacker, and cornerbacks. Birch is the one that is considered, I guess, the star of the defensive line. I don't know that he's on the Kayvon Thibodeau level, but kind of a game wrecker potentially, right?
Yeah, he's a different player. Thibodeau was an elite athlete who, when you bumped into him at the team hotel, you were shocked that this guy was playing on the defensive line. He looked more like, a power forward in the NBA, right? Or a wing in the NBA. He just didn't strike you as a giant, physically imposing, take on a double team guy, but he had such a great first step and he was so fast, nobody could block him. I mean, he was just elite in that way. And you've seen it in the NFL. Birch is different. His legs are tree trunks. He's more traditional. You've seen players like Jordan Birch at Ohio State, and he is a physically imposing player at the point of attack. And now you really see him getting comfortable. He was a real problem for Michigan State. His name was called too many times, but to mention, but he was a playmaker in that way. And you need a guy like that because, the real strength of the defense is the secondary. And you've got a transfer from Washington, Jabbar Muhammad, who's a fantastic corner. Yeah, their secondary is elite. And I think they're going to have multiple players in that secondary who play in the NFL. I think the linebackers, you got a baseball player, the center fielder's playing linebacker, and Bryce Bechter, and you've got a real opportunistic linebacking core. But I think if you're ranking these units, you're going secondary's the best, defensive line after that, linebackers come in third. But it's been really interesting to watch them improve on defense, because that was the big question 2 years ago. They really have an identity on defense. I kind of wondered about Tosh Lapoy, the coordinator. Could he coach? Would the defense improve? Could he win a chess match? He's got some guys right now that he's having success with. And you can tell against Michigan State, when Michigan State was lining up to kick a field goal late, Tosh Lapoy's on the sideline going, miss it. You could see how much it meant to them to just hold the opposition to every possible point. But big challenge. I mean, Chip Kelly, that's like playing Kasparov in chess. I mean, this is going to be a real challenge for Tosh Lapoy and Dan Lanning.
How's the kicking game?
Okay. Like prior to last week, I thought, do they have a guy who can hit a big field goal? And then they lined up and kicked a big field goal. So, I think they were testing some things out, against Michigan State, going, all right, we might need to kick a field goal. Let's try a long one here. And so they did that. But if it came down to a kicking contest, I'd give the edge to Ohio State. If it comes down to hey, you're going to kick a 50-yard field goal and see who can do this more consistently. I don't know, how you tell me.
Well, Ohio State's kickoff kicker kicked 3 straight out of bounds one game. So that was not good. Ohio State's still waiting to break one in the game, and we keep waiting and waiting. They haven't done it in 10 years. Which is amazing to think that Ohio State hasn't broken a punt or kickoff return in 10 years for a touchdown. I think if I had to guess, I'd say across the board, Ohio State has better talent, better athletes across the board. I'd say that. It doesn't mean they're going to win. I do think the road component's a big deal. And we haven't talked about Will Howard. So far he's been really good. He's had a couple of picks that he'd like to have back, but who doesn't, right? Every quarterback has that. But overall, he's been really efficient, uses his legs. It's been a smooth transition, unlike Dylan Gabriel, apparently. It's been a very smooth transition. I don't know if he is Gabriel's talent necessarily, but the deep balls, he's underthrown some deep balls, but short, medium range pass, he's been on the money. And so, as he's got the demeanor of somebody who enjoys the big moments. It's not too big for him. He looks forward to this. This is why he came to Ohio State, all that kind of stuff. And you believe it. I mean, he is a very just a natural leader. I mean, guys gravitate toward him. He's a very outgoing, friendly guy. Like the world, he's a happy guy. And so it's been interesting to watch him. And he'll always get compared to Kyle McCord, and that's not fair to either one. And Kyle McCord was a first-year freshman. Or not first-year freshman, a first-year starter, and felt correctly that Ryan Day never quite embraced him. And so there was always that undercurrent of, am I solid here? And obviously at the end he wasn't. So I think that Ohio State's happy to have Will Howard. It gives them a running dimension and everything else except maybe absolutely elite CJ Stroud-ish kind of ability. Who does, right?
But it's funny. I've been looking at the box scores too, and I can see Chip Kelly's fingerprints on kind of what he's doing with the backfield, because he did that frequently at Oregon, where there was just a nice distribution of carries and yards. And I'll go back to Kenyon Barner and LaMichael James and LeGarrette Blount, and Chip Kelly really effectively found ways to use those guys and put them in situations where they really thrived. And I can see him, I'm kind of looking at Ohio State's backfield and looking at the distribution of carries game to game, and I can see Chip Kelly tinkering a little bit. And by the end of the year, I think it'll be really interesting to see, who has how many yards and how he ended up just, balancing that, because he did a really good job at Oregon of kind of balancing that and developing everybody.
honestly, I think a lot of that is as much Carlos Loughlin, your old friend,
Yeah.
former Oregon assistant, as it is Chip Kelly. Usually, Ohio State tends to let the position group coaches handle the snap count stuff.
Mm.
What do you remember about Carlos Loughlin?
Just that, a ball of energy,
Yeah,
and it was a big blow. Oregon could say all they want that it wasn't a loss, but I think that those two moves, Lachlan and Chip Kelly, jump into the other side of this game. I mean, how do we not, factor that as a key piece of the puzzle? And I had, for most of the summer and for weeks of the early part of this season, thought that is going to be the biggest factor in the game. And then the only thing that got me off of that is that I watched Oregon change around, shuffle some guys on the offensive line after the first two games. And in fact, they seem to find a combination that is working and much more effective than they were against Idaho. They were having real problems blocking. The center was getting pushed back into Dylan Gabriel. And so I'm going to watch, Bill, the early part of this game. And if Oregon's offensive line can block Ohio State, now it becomes about coaching. And I think that is, the biggest factor to me is watching Lachlan and Chip Kelly. But the scout on Lachlan was just a tremendous coach, energetic, had been familiar with Dan Lanning, and just the timing of it, I think, was really disrupting to Oregon, because I think they felt like they had him and their mind was on other things when he ended up going to Ohio State.
Yeah. Well, that was a weird deal because obviously people here know that Tony Alford left in the middle of spring practice. I mean, to go to Michigan of all places, that was crazy. Well, John, is there anything else you want to add about this game?
Well, I just would be curious that, we're on new territory. We've watched some teams take a week off. I've wondered how the expansion of the playoff would maybe affect the focus of teams. Was Alabama totally focused against Vanderbilt? I don't know. Was Miami not locked in against Cal? We've seen some focus issues. I don't think there's going to be a focus issue in this game because the buildup of it. But I do think we all have to be cognizant that the Kansas City Chiefs lost 6 games last season. They had a stretch in the middle of the year where they lost to the Raiders. They were everyone was wondering, are they going to be a playoff team? Are they about to melt down? They end up with the world championship. I think the college game is going to feel more like that with this expanded playoff where, you can't afford to have like 6 losses, but a 2-loss team could win the national championship and say, hey, we lost to Vanderbilt in the middle of the year and we regrouped, or we lost the game at Oregon and we regrouped. So it's causing this sort of adjustment of mindset with media and fans where, all right, we're going to have to look at the regular season differently. And so I'm excited to see this game. I think it's going to give us a great taste of where these programs are. It's going to validate somebody tremendously who needs the validation. But I don't think this rivalry, I'm going to call it that because I think these two teams are going to be at the top of the conference. I think it's a blossoming rivalry in the Big Ten. I think it's going to be fun to watch.
Right. Well, John, I appreciate you doing this podcast with me. John Canzano, the man in Oregon. Look forward to seeing you in Eugene. And thanks for doing this.
Yeah, of course, Bill. Thank you, man.